Namaskar and good evening. On behalf of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TISS, I extend a warm welcome to our distinguished panel and the members of the audience to this important panel discussion on senior citizens in a changing medico-social context. We know that India is aging much faster than previously thought. The purpose of this panel discussion is twofold. One is to discuss the changing medico-social context our seniors are in, to better understand the state of affairs today and what we know about critical future challenges. And two, to discuss how the challenges can be addressed through collaboration and collective action. We have a very, very eminent panel today with us. Let me quickly introduce you to our esteemed panelists. You can see on your screen Ms. Sucheta Dalal. She's the trustee of Money Life Foundation. She needs no introduction. Dr. Nasreen Rustamparam, faculty professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Dr. Prasad Chatterjee, professor and geriatrician at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. And Dr. Vispi Jokhi, CEO, Masina Hospital in Bombay. The session will be moderated by one of our TCNs, Ms. Sobhana Jayamadhavan. She works with Simon Fraser University, Canada, as AVP External Relations. This panel discussion will draw upon the expertise of 4 experts who have a deep understanding for senior citizen issues and are involved in addressing many critical issues that this population faces. Their insights will be valuable for all those who are involved in researching and serving our senior citizens in various capacities. Without any further delay, I would like to cut across to the Vice Chancellor of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Professor Salini Bharat. It's our privilege that Madam could take out time to join us today. Professor Bharat is widely known for her work on social determinants of health, with special reference to reproductive and sexual health, young people's and women's health and well-being, social aspects of HIV, TB, including stigma and discrimination, prevention and care, and demographic transition. She served as a member of the Mission Steering Group of National Rural Health Mission and the National Health Systems Resource Center, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, and is the current project director of the Global Fund supported Saksham Counseling Project for drug-resistant TB patients in 4 Indian states, and the Jan Urja project supported by Tata Power. She also serves on the advisory boards of PHFI and Alliance India. Professor Bharat has 4 books and over 70 journal articles to her credit in national and international journals. Her most recent publications are a 4-volume edited series titled The Parsis of India, Continuing at the Crossroads from Sage, and Health and Well-being of India's Young People from Springer. Over to you, Madam. I request you to kindly open the discussion. Then we'll request Sobhana ji to moderate the discussion. Thank you, Madam. I'll just unmute you. Yes, you can speak.
Thank you, Tanmay, for that introduction, and welcome to all the distinguished panelists, some of our alumni here, and to all the participants. Thank you for making it possible for me to be here. The theme is, of course, very, very important, and we have the figures and everything is telling us that the world is growing fast. This includes Asia, but 2 of the most populous countries based in Asia, China and India, are still in a way young, have a young population, I should say. And however, the demographic transition is catching up with us as well. In fact, in both these countries, and we are seeing the differences that the demography is making. India, with 1.36 billion people and counting, is set to become the world's most populous country in just about next 6 years. In 2011 census, India's population of 60 plus people was under 10%, somewhere around 8.6 or 9% of the total population. but by 2050 it is expected to rise to almost 19.5%, which means that more than doubling of this population will take place. And what's even more important is that percentage of 75 plus will increase manyfold because of the increase in expectancy in this part of the world as well. And these figures, as you all, and I'm sure you all are experts in this field, you are familiar, these figures indicate that what challenges European countries and countries like Japan were facing and are facing, India will face in the very near future. So India is beginning to face, and I think we all have to get prepared for what would be the size of this population, and this may happen in the next 2 or 3 decades. It is extremely important, therefore, to prepare ourselves for dealing with several sets of complex issues concerning not just health but also social life, economic matters, and so on. If we talk about health situation, which is already precarious, the precarity of our senior citizens needs special attention. India is set to now see not just the childhood diseases and health concerns. These will in fact give way to diseases of older people. The levels of infections or infectious diseases that we have seen and the acute health conditions that we have been seeing will move to more and more chronic and degenerative diseases. And therefore, this profile of health in the country will change. But it may also happen that we continue to have, diseases of children and adolescents. At the same time, we will be dealing with diseases and health situation of the elderly. So these would be twin sets of problems. Uh, and this is going to result in more and more health morbidities, restricted mobility and functional dependence, and several types of mental health issues with the kind of social fabric that we have and the family system not able to keep pace with or cope with the kind of challenges we have. There will be increasing, I think, levels of loneliness, isolation, and a lot of mental health issues. So the scenario will further complicate because of the diversity of our population. So the rural elderly and people with, from different backward, backgrounds or disadvantaged backgrounds will face and will be facing these problems even more acutely. And therefore, we have to be preparing ourselves to deal with these multiple challenges. But I don't think we should be only looking at a very morbid and a very, negative situation causing alarm to us. I think we also have to consider that the senior citizens of the next 2 or 3 decades will also have an agency of their own. They are going to be open to learning. They are adaptable to changes, and I think they will also be cooperating in managing, the situation of the demography that is changing fast. And I feel that with the support from the government, from the civil society, and from the academia, we will all be looking at interventions that will make the senior citizens' life more comfortable and India to be able to cope up with this kind of a problem. So, with these few words, I would like to give it back to Tanmay to take it forward. And I'm sure this particular panel discussion will throw light on how we will be dealing with the situation and maybe indeed how we are dealing with it even now. So thank you once again, and over to you, Tanmay, and to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Uh, I think that was a very, very important message. The demographic transition that you spoke about, and your call for action, and how we should look at it positively, I think will give us a lot of strength to collaborate and work together in this important area. Thank you, madam, so much. Let me quickly introduce our audience to our panelists. That's very important. Um, Let me go to our first panelist, Ms. Sucheta Dalal. She needs no introduction. She is an award-winning business journalist and author for over 30 years. In the early 90s, Ms. Dalal joined the prominent Mumbai-based newspaper, Times of India as a journalist for their business and economic wing, where she rose to become the financial editor in 1998. During her stint at Times of India, she investigated a number of cases that would eventually lead to her prominence in the field of journalism and activism. These included the Harshad Mehta scam of 1992, the Enron scam, the Industrial Development Bank of India scam, the Ketan Parekh scam in 2001, among others. In 2006, she began writing for Money Life, a fortnightly magazine on investment started by her husband, Debashish Basu, where she is now the managing editor. Responding to the poor financial literacy in India, she and her husband in 2010 founded Money Life Foundation, a not-for-profit organization based in Mumbai, which works primarily on financial literacy and advocates for safe and fair market practices. She co-authored a book on the securities scam with her husband, Mr. Debashish Basu, called The Scam from Harshad Mehta to Ketan Parekh. For her work in the field of journalism, she has been conferred with numerous awards, including Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Women Media Person and the Padma Shri in 2006 for her work in investigative reporting. It is lovely to have you among us, ma'am. Uh, I got across to Dr. Bhispi Joki, who is the current CEO of Masina Hospital in Bombay. Dr. Joki has been working for more than three decades in the hospital and healthcare industry. He has worked in hospitals like JJ Hospital, St. George Hospital, Mahatma Gandhi Hospital, Bhagwati Hospital, National University Hospital. He has delegated and organized the prestigious Western India Regional Orthopedic Conference. He specializes in trauma, joint replacement, and hand surgery. He's an alumnus of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences Executive PG Diploma in Health Administration. He's currently the CEO of South Bombay's famous Masina Hospital. Thank you, sir, for joining us this evening. I think your work for the underprivileged is very well known in Bombay, and we look forward to hearing you. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Prasad Chatterjee. This is an eminent panel, so definitely I'll take a little bit of time. Bear with me for a minute or two. Let me introduce you to Dr. Prasad Chatterjee. As a faculty in geriatric medicine at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Dr. Chatterjee is involved in the training of PHC and CSC doctors in geriatric medicine under NPHC nursing training and other paramedics. He also teaches postgraduate students of geriatric medicine and carries on basic and clinical research in this field. He's a passionate teacher and a mentor and believes in nurturing a generation of doctors, nurses, and other paramedical staff in geriatric medicine to enable more people to have access to this specialized branch of medicine. Dr. Chatterjee is also at the forefront of creation of the departments of geriatric medicine across India in medical colleges and hospitals for both training of doctors as well as the availability of specialized care for older adults. Through his non-profit Healthy Aging, Dr. Chatterjee has shown exemplary service towards the elderly during the peak of COVID-19 in India. Now, let me come to Professor Nasreen Rustam Param, our very own in Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She has been instrumental in putting together a curriculum in general geriatric care, a diploma and a certificate program that the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, as the first Indian university to offer such a program in geriatric care. So Dr. Nasreen holds a doctorate degree from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in the area of management of human service organizations. She was the chairperson of the Center for Lifelong Learning, continues to serve as a professor at the Center for Lifelong Learning, where she offers various programs in gerontology, counseling, youth development, and geriatric care. The flagship program of the center is participatory training methodology. It has over a dozen running collaboration offering courses across the country in various places: Pune, Aurangabad, Lucknow, New Delhi, Navi Mumbai. The department has produced roughly about 250 skilled professionals in the field of geriatric care. She is certified in the Institute of Cultural Affairs, Technology of Participation Methods in 1995 and has been participating practicing these in her teaching and facilitation work. She is a certified trainer for leadership beyond boundaries conducted by the Center for Creativity Leadership, Greensboro, USA, and certified trainer for leadership development conducted by the Center for Creative Leadership Singapore at TMTC Pune. She has been a key trainer and facilitator for nationwide program capacity building of women managers in higher education, conducted across 14 states under the aegis of University Grant Commission. As you can see, it's a very, very eminent panel, and we look forward to hearing to their views on this important subject today. And the session will be moderated by a Titian herself, Ms. Sobhana Jayamadhavan. She graduated in 1991 from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Ms. Sobhana has worked in the non-profits, public, private sectors in India, Malaysia, and Canada. After immigrating to Canada in 1995, Ms. Sobhana worked with the government of British Columbia for about 20 years. In 2017, Ms. Sobhana returned to Canada and joined Simon Fraser University as Associate Vice President, External Relations. Ms. Sobhana continues to remain very connected to India and she's been supporting us doing this project, NUSSD, through her zeal and enthusiasm towards social work. I have already taken a lot of time. Now, may I request Ms. Sobhana Jayamadhavan to moderate the discussion, please. Thank you so much. And sorry about this, for taking a lot of time. But as you can understand, it's a very, very eminent panel today. Thank you. Over to you, Sobhana ji.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bharat and Mr. Naik, for your comments and introductions. And I'm conscious that we have a very engaged audience here with us. I can already see the comments coming in. So without much ado, I am going to welcome you all and have our esteemed panelists take a brief minute to set some context or make some opening remarks. And I would like to welcome Dr. Joki to get started here.
Dr. Joki, I'll just unmute you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here. I see that the panel is very eminent and I am a new person in this field. But basically, I come from a situation where, as a healthcare administrator the last 6 years, I have realized that there is a need for taking care of the old and elderly, and there has not been enough being done in this country for that. We've always felt that we have family support systems which will take care of the old, but gradually we are seeing more and more in our own personal lives and in our own experiences that there is a problem and the problem needs an urgent solution. And I think this discussion will help in this solution. And I think if we have to put a main point to start with, it's a question of resources and how do we allocate the resources for this field where everybody feels that the resources are scarce and the government's investment in the healthcare sector itself is very, very low. That's all I need to speak now, at least.
Thank you, Dr. Joki. Very important points, and we'll delve a bit deeper into this in a minute or two. Over to you, Dr. Prasad Chatterjee.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks to Professor Bharat and the esteemed panelists as well as the audience. As a geriatrician, I must say, and even last year published in my published book also, I tried to mention that what I understand is that what is lacking is preparation, and that I will not blame any system or little contrary to Dr. Joki, I will say the preparation starts from me, the preparation starts from you, the family member, the elderly person who is aging actually. You know that this recently published LASI data, where we are seeing LASI is Longitudinal Aging Survey of India, where we are looking at people from 45. So ideally speaking, we should start thinking of aging population, or the preparation for aging should be started even at the age of 45. So we have to see that how are we preparing, are we preparing ourselves, how the family is preparing to cater this population like me or you or anybody else, and then comes the society, because society is
Family
you, me,
is
and all of us,
preparing
the
to
society, right?
cater this population like.
So I think I will stop here as an introduction. So it's a question of preparation for all of us. Yeah, over to you, madam.
Thank you for that, Dr. Chatterjee. Over to you, Professor Rustam from.
All. In my opening remarks, I would like to just stress the fact that we are a very heterogeneous society. And the elders who we are going to speak about today are also a part of this heterogeneity. What this implies is that the challenges that are faced by this population cross economic and cultural manifestations. It is a very subjective experience of the person, whether they are happy, unhappy, contented, or discontented in their particular situations where they find themselves. And I would like to say that COVID-19 is just the cherry on the cake. And the cake is one of, neglect and marginalization of the elderly for several decades in our country's policy. And I hope that we will not cross this particular decade saying the same sentence after another 5 or 6 years. So over to you, Sobhna.
Thank you, Professor Rustam from. A very valid point indeed. And last but not the least, Ms. Dalal.
Hello, am I unmuted? Okay. So I just want to say in my opening remarks that I'm the odd one out over here. Everyone else is from the medical field and the social field. I look at finance, and I think this is at the core of what Dr. Chatterjee talked about, preparation. And, he talks about preparing from 45. We think that it has to start even earlier in a country like ours because we are a country without social security. So in the rest of the world, you have a safety net in the form of social security provided by the government. But as Dr. Safram said, this is a country that has not thought about senior citizens issues seriously at all because we've been, constantly hammering the fact that India is a young country and we have to take advantage of the younger population. And suddenly, as you said, the pandemic has been, an eye-opener. Hopefully, when we're going to look at things pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, because a lot of the issues that are faced by senior people sort of came to the fore during during this pandemic. One, as you said, mental issues, financial issues, loneliness, just being left on their own because the dynamics are changing in multiple ways. As Dr. Joki said, we are moving into nuclear families, not just because people don't want to stay with their parents, but also because younger people are moving away for jobs even within India. So in West Bengal and Calcutta, children are working in the IT sector in Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore. So perforce, there are a lot of parents. Earlier, it used to be children going abroad. So one of the core areas that we have worked on is, what happens? How do people prepare? A, do you have enough savings? B, we find the cost of insurance and cost of medicines, just taking care of yourself medically is galloping way ahead of inflation. So it's been in double digits even when we claim that inflation is below 10%. The third thing is, like I said, the lack of social security. The fourth is a lack of government thinking and planning for it. So when I come to my panel participation, I'll talk about it, but we had to work so hard even in making people understand the need for different kinds of things like retirement homes. So it was fashionable a few years ago, but there's absolutely no regulation to safeguard people who invest over there. And the government has done no thinking about it. And finally, the big worry that I have is how senior citizens who also have, I'm sure the doctors in the panel will tell you that as you age, there are cognitive issues and it's easier for people to be defrauded. The question of financial fraud, which comes both from legitimate organizations defrauding you, as well as complete cheats and fraudsters. But I would like to discuss it during the panel. I want to stop here at my opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Dalal. So I'm sure the audience agrees with me that not only do we have an esteemed panel, but we have people with a great passion for issues connected to senior citizens in India. And the expertise and the discussions that we're going to have in the next 40 minutes or so is going to be a rich one. And we're going to make sure we have some time for questions from the audience too. So I want to kick off the panel discussion, starting with Dr. Vispi Joki. Dr. Joki, in a recent interview, you talked about the challenges of cost of healthcare in terms of maintaining a good infrastructure, adequate equipment, and providing the best care for patients in India. In your expert opinion, what is the impact of these structural issues on Indian seniors both today and in the future?
I am part of a hospital which has got a lot of space, but poor resources. We don't have enough resources. And running a charitable trust hospital in the present healthcare scenario, where there is hardly any support from government or from other institutions to make sure that we provide affordable healthcare solutions, is a problem. Even as I speak, my hospital caters to mental health and burns. Now, these are two departments which are not at all in the radar of hospitals who want to run hospital who want to run and create a sustainable kind of a model. So even assisted living and a kind of assisted living model where we provide the elderly a place to stay with medical help, along with a kind of a support system where they do not feel as though they are being neglected and shunted into a home, but provided a proper environment where they have enough mix of support along with a kind of what I call a sense of independence. We do a feeling of not being so dependent. Now, to provide this, it will be the lowest on the priority of any hospital or a healthcare setup, and that is where we need to get this working. And whereas there are enough number of people in the NGO sector who would be willing to fund such an infrastructure, but to create the proper human resource and to create the proper mix of the right kind of care is a big challenge. And while I'm talking of infrastructure in terms of actual space and buildings and brick and mortar, the more important problem is the kind of trained and adequate human resource who can take care of these elderly people. Also creating models which are different, because I really feel that there is a lot of symbiosis which can occur if we combine old age along with, say, differently able, if we combine old age with some kind of a work or some kind of a model where they are actually doing some work which is probably valuable to society. We can also use virtual platforms where they actually work and provide their wisdom, because the old have wisdom which they would definitely like to share if they are given the right opportunity. And when that occurs, they feel empowered and that they feel as though they are doing something worthwhile and can feel ultimately wanted in society, rather than being just someone who is kept on the periphery into a kind of an old age home. See, I think we are all the time thinking of who will take care, but we are only talking of basic needs. We need to talk about things beyond the basic needs. So that is the challenge which I think we need to address. So, I mean, that's what I wanted to say, nothing more than that at the moment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joki. I think, in your brief response, you touched on not just structural issues, but also the societal aspects of it, and also how do you then put senior citizens, at the core and give them purpose, value, and something to look forward in their sunset years, but also how do you tie them up with all the different aspects of our society and bring in other groups to sort of be part of that collaborative decision making, and also problem solving. So, a lot of important points you touched on, and I look forward to going a bit deeper if we can and if we have the time to do that. I'd like to move on to Dr. Prasad Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, you have shared that COVID-19 crisis impacts humanity and cannot be conquered alone. So, in the Indian context, I'm curious to know, how do we collectively imagine and reimagine working together as a society towards aging and well being in later life for our very diverse senior citizens in India?
Yeah, true. Actually, I'll give an example. I'm fortunate that my parents are here. So lockdown is a problem for all of us, right? Across the generation. But I had COVID. My parents had COVID. My wife had COVID. But by God's grace, we managed so well because we are together. This is as simple example as it is, and I know many nuclear family, my friends who are in nuclear family, they are suffering here, their parents are suffering in some different places. Even my children, who are also definitely, most of the school children are in huge trouble. They have also, I will say, a lot of mental agony. They cannot go out, they cannot play. So we manage very well because we are together. So this is a small example, but it starts with the family. It's my family, then two family, three family, and that is the society, if I take it that way. Definitely we need collaborative, concerted, multi-stakeholder approach. And as I mentioned that the elderly people are too heterogeneous, and every individual has a different problem. But we used to work so closely, like as a family. Somehow it is, I know there is disintegration, it will happen because of this crisis, because of the situation. But at least from the COVID, we understood that together we are much stronger. Together we can fight any form of virus or any form of problem. I know many families, many parents, many children are not that fortunate. They are forced to go out many a times, even if they don't want. But I think COVID has also taught us that how important is this to be together. I wrote a poem also related to this. Uh, in ancient time, when we used to fight with wild animal, right? We came together to fight with them and survive. It was because it was the survival of fittest. COVID has definitely taught us that we have to have the empathy for others. My next door person who is struggling to get an oxygen cylinder or a concentrator and calling me, Dr. Chatterjee, can you help me? Whatever may be my behavior, well behaved maybe am I for last couple of years, if I cannot help him or her in this situation, then I'm not a human being, definitely. And this is a crisis which should be treated as an opportunity where we should be united, irrespective of our social class, irrespective of our financial status. There are like pseudo aura and all these things. When, to me, for and for Dr. Saab also, he will understand. When you are suffering from COVID, I have seen this, and in front of me, someone's saturation dropped from 90 to 60. Even if he was the king or he was the beggar, there was no difference. Everybody is folding hand, save my life, give me some oxygen, you know so this is the time when we understood that we have to be much more disciplined, we have to be together. And it is true for elderly, it is true for this wave was dangerous for elderly, next wave may be going to be dangerous for the children. So for the middle class also, I also suffered, and this time I understood like why we should be together. And I feel most of us should understand this, that why should we be together. There were a lot of decay in the society. We don't talk to next door person, we don't talk, we don't have time, we always say, oh, I don't have time. But COVID, somehow this novel virus has taught us that you have to spend time with your family, with your neighbor, with your regarding senior citizen. I published long back into 2020 March itself. We have to connect with youngster. As I mentioned, my parents are happy because my children are young and they are fighting, they are playing, they're always together. So even if they are not together, I understand there is a digital divide. Most of the elderly people are not so techno savvy, but somehow even somebody calls, some young fellow calls their granny. uh, it's true for my nan. My nanny is staying alone in West Bengal. My daughter, that means great, great granddaughter, when she calls, my granny will sing. She's 84, she has a cracked voice, but she sings. So this happiness she can transfer over simple phone. We don't require a video call, video chat, and this is possible. So that only, again, I'll come back, we have to prepare, the children has to prepare that how to take care of your grandchildren. And as you rightly mentioned, when they talk to grandchildren or even children also, they get a sense of belongingness. Social isolation is not that we are staying differently. Even if you are a person who is staying with 10 people may be socially isolated. If he cannot connect, he or she cannot connect. So my point is, even if there is disintegration, which is a natural, I'll say this is a natural phenomenon now, we cannot stop that, but we should be connected through our heart and soul, and we should know our responsibility. We should prepare ourselves to, because again, I give this example. I tell this to my son also. Will you like your dadu staying in a corner of the room, not talking to anybody, becoming frail every day, cognitively he is forgetting? This is one form. And another form is you are helping dadu to be active, taking him to the park, chatting him, gardening, learning something from each other. From our NGO Healthy Aging India, we have started a program called Intergenerational Learning, and it is really, really helping both the generation. We have almost empowered around more than 100 elderly people who are actually lonely, depressed, some amount of forgetfulness. They are teaching underprivileged children from tribal area and slum area from Delhi. Even during this COVID, we connected them through digitally. So definitely there is dropout, but these are few. There are thousands options to connect, but you have to think, you have to prepare that, and at any point of time, senior citizen are the people who consumes maximum health cost. So keeping them healthy through primordial and preventive care is cost effective for the family as well as for the government. And I will just say one more point to Dr. Saab, that national program for the healthcare of elderly they have started, and we have even AIMS is a nodal officer in Mumbai. Also, your this Grand Medical College is another RGC, Regional Geriatric Center. They have started a mass form of like training of the training of the doctors and other health professionals. You told very rightly, because approach to geriatric patient is, I will say, entirely different from younger population. I'm sorry I spoke a little more.
No, I
With
mean,
you.
thank you so
Yeah.
much, Dr. Chatterjee. I mean, you touched on so many aspects there, the human side, of this problem, a humanistic approach, being needed, and a lot of attention when you watch the news is about, the virus itself, and then the digital divide and, lack of resources. But a lot of times we don't pause and just think about all the things that we could do now with what we have, such as the intergenerational connectivity, for instance, right? There might be only one cell phone in a home, but there's nothing stopping grandchildren and grandparents together sharing that, watching a show together, or recording a piece of music, or creating a piece of music that will keep all of them happy and connected. So we'll come back to this in a minute with the second round of questions, but I want to move to Dr. Nasreen Rustam from Dr. Rustam, with over 3 decades of experience in higher education, in NGOs, and experience in the front lines, could you summarize for us what you would say are the most serious psychosocial challenges that you think senior citizens in India face today?
So there is no doubt about the fact that it is this segment, senior citizens in the population, who have largely been vulnerable to the pandemic. One of the reasons could be, a significant reason is, of course, the weakened immune system, But along with that, it's also the high possibility that they would have at least one chronic illness, such as diabetes or blood pressure or lung disease, heart disease, and so on. Globally, and we know that that makes them more vulnerable, to the problem. We know that in community dwelling, for community dwelling senior citizens, societies globally as well as in India have suggested self-quarantine as a measure. And we also know that globally and in India, institutionalized elderly, that is in nursing care homes, have been advised, or regulations have been put in place, in fact, that their families cannot visit them, their friends, etc., and all visiting, etc., is banned. Now, the two main strategies that means for either community dwelling older adults or for institutionalized adults has been to cut social connections. Under the name of physical distancing, it has also become social distancing. And this is something very critical. While we can understand that at a time of crisis, it would seem legitimate to have done this. But there is no gainsaying the fact that it has had tremendous negative impacts on the elderly. And one of the most significant psychosocial impact that this has had is social isolation and loneliness. Now, social isolation is an objective fact. You may have fewer friends, you may have lesser social connections, you may have fewer social relationships. Loneliness, on the other hand, is a subjective concept of well-being, the feeling of being alone. I think many of us would have heard of a phrase, loneliness haunts the places where crowds gather. So it is not a matter of the number of people that you have around you, or it's a question of, are you present to the people who are around you? Are they cognizant of your presence? And this is the aspect, the first psychosocial challenge that I would like to mention, and that is social isolation and loneliness. There is increasing evidence for us to know that social isolation and loneliness both contribute in a large measure to poor physical and mental health. Obesity, high blood pressure, diminishing immune response, anxiety, depression, poorer cognitive behavior, and Alzheimer, early onset of dementias, and mortality. So this is the impact physically and mentally of social isolation and loneliness. And this is the first challenge that I wanted to mention. The second challenge that the elderly today are facing, which I would like to draw upon, is the fact that there is a lot of the creation of dependency. The self-quarantining and inability of elders to step out for their own needs has created the myth that in any case, the elderly are unproductive and dependent. This is a myth. The 75th NSS survey carried out in about 2017-18 pointed to the fact that 92.4% of Indian elderly are mobile. 5.5% are confined to their homes for certain reasons. I think it is natural or normal to assume that this 92.4% would be able to do their own groceries, go for their medical visits, maybe some banking work, etc. They would also be able to look after their own activities of daily living, ADL as we call them. If that is the case, then it is a myth that the elderly are actually dependent on the youngsters. In fact, it is self-quarantining which has led to greater dependency. Greater dependency on others to make decisions for you leads to a drop in self-esteem. Elder people find that they are not able to make simple decisions for their own self. They are not able to decide if they can go out or not. They are not able to decide if they can go to the doctor, take care of their medical needs or not. And all this is in fact led to insecurity. Because when you cannot make decisions for yourself, you feel disempowered, you feel uneasy, uncomfortable, and you feel that you always have to rely on others. and your decision-making capacity, you have it, but you're not allowed to exercise it. And that is the second psychosocial challenge that I refer to, the rise of insecurity and the rise of, and the drop in self-esteem for elderly people who actually were able to manage for themselves quite well during pre-COVID times. The third psychosocial challenge the third and the last that I would like to mention is the rise of a feeling of vulnerability and redundancy that older people can be done without in this society. And this is the third psychosocial challenge that we have to look at. So in fact, the way in which the government response has evolved and the sporadic civil society response also which has evolved, there have been very few community public health messages for mental health. We have been completely absorbed with the physical aspect of COVID. Now and again, it has been mentioned, and as far back as August 2020 itself, it was mentioned that mental health of all those who were in self-quarantine and in social isolation was in fact suffering. Psychiatrists and mental health specialists reported that there was a larger turnout of patients to their clinics and on hospital, if not physically, by telemedicine or telecommunication. However, there has been no concerted effort from the public health services to evolve a community health program. There have been sporadic efforts by civil society, and there are some counseling efforts and some really good ones where barefoot mental health training was given to school teachers and to others who are interacting with children and older people. However, these have been far and few in between, and much more needs to be done. We are already late by maybe 12 months in making this attempt, and we need to begin on an urgent footing to look at the issues, to look at solutions by which we can screen, diagnose, and treat symptoms of social isolation before they become very difficult, and thereby look at the psychosocial challenges and the mental health challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rustam. From the psychosocial aspects are so complex, and then when you take a country like India, which has a very heterogeneous seniors population, varied cultural differences, socio-economic differences, it becomes a very complex, multi-layered sort of an issue. But I really found something you said quite profound. Are you present to the people around you? And I think something for all of us to reflect on, not just during the pandemic, but post-pandemic recovery. How are we in a crowd making sure that we hear, see, and respond, in a humane way to people around us, so that the feeling of loneliness, could be addressed, among other psychosocial aspects. This brings us to another aspect that hasn't been touched on so far. And Ms. Dalal, of course, is the expert in this. And so I'm going to pose this question to you, Ms. Dalal. In a fast-changing world where disruption is the new norm, you have shared with future journalists, it pays to write stories which matter to the people. In your opinion, which is the one story related to senior citizens which you think has not been written and is long overdue?
Okay, you're talking to a journalist with over 35 years in the field, so I don't think there's any one story that one is talking about. And as a financial journalist, in fact, 10 years ago when we decided to set up Money Life Foundation, it is on the realization that people are being cheated every day. They don't understand enough about finance, and there is a need for some kind of hand-holding, grievance redress, helping them keep their money safe. Because while health, especially mental health, is a significant part of what you do, none of it in terms of self-esteem and whatever works if you're not financially independent. And today we have a generation of senior citizens who have been fairly financially independent, but are extremely vulnerable to several things. For instance, one of the things that most people in their 60s and especially 70s have grown up with is a closed economy. So we are all sort of, in the 90s, the economy began to open up. So we are all people who believe that, Sarkar takes care of us. So you believe in your bankers, you believe the only insurance that you had was national insurance, not private insurance. So you don't assume that your insurers or your bankers are sitting out there to cheat you. And that is the big mindset change that senior citizens are not able to make. And so they're vulnerable every day to mis-selling of financial products which they considered safe, the lack of grievance redress, and the galloping costs of medical care and insurance. And post pandemic, we haven't even come to the realization as yet, but insurance costs are going to just leap post pandemic. And I don't know what the cost is going to be for people who are senior citizens and have had COVID, because while there is not enough discussion on this, they are considered more vulnerable, especially if they have comorbidities. So insurance costs are going to be sky high, and people don't understand it. People who come to us and say, I've been insured 25 years. Why is it that on my 60th birthday, suddenly the world has changed and my insurance costs go up? But that's how it is. And the reality of living in a society with zero social security. So look at what's happened. I'll give you a few examples. You have PMC Bank. There are people who have just lost their savings. We've tried to handhold people through that, and the stories are heartrending. You've had things that have happened for the first time ever. So someone who is 75 probably faces it for the first time ever, that he's put money in AAA rated bonds, tier one bonds of a bank, and it's suddenly overnight they tell you that it's zero. These are the 81 bonds of Yes Bank or Lakshmi Vilas Bank, which have been sold to them by wealth management or relationship managers as being safer than fixed deposits. Your return on fixed deposits is declining. So you're living on a smaller pool. Other than people who are government pensioners, where their pension is adjusted to inflation, everybody, every other senior citizen is extremely vulnerable. And this is just one part of it. In fact, in my experience, I find that the day a senior citizen, and this is a horror story, I kept, we've been taking up as a campaign with the RBI. Why is it that know your customer requirements are so repetitive for people with bank accounts? And they're called every 2 years when they're low risk people, especially people who are senior citizens and living on their savings. One banker told me a horror story. He says, the banks call you to the branch in order to be able to mis-sell you insurance. When you're face to face, they can sell you products which relationship managers used to come to your house and do. And we've spent 10 years trying to help people resolve it. So how do you teach people to be safe? They begin to trust these people who are coming to their house. They are bankers. I keep saying that today's fraudsters don't look like fraudsters. They're carrying a corporate visiting card. They're wearing a tie. You're the one who's giving them tea. There is no way to recognize that they're ripping apart your savings. They're giving you insurance that will not give you the return. And you are left on your own, especially if you're a private citizen. Nobody wants to handle it. Something that I keep banging on about. I don't think Indians, whether it is youngsters or senior citizens, even understand that it's non-existent. So you put money in fixed deposits. What happens? It is unsecured. It's gone. I mean, how do I tell someone who says I'm 80 and I've lost 2 crores, which was my entire nest egg? What do I do? Because I put it in a fixed deposit of a company which has vanished. The only heartbreaking answer is, sir, there is nothing you can do. It's gone. And you have to just imagine how this person is going to live. And not everybody is lucky to be in the position that Dr. Chatterjee described, where you have a loving family around you who's going to take care of you. There are people who've been left high and dry. This is one part. Okay. The other part is what happened to all the people who moved to retirement homes. These are again horror stories that we took up because they thought that we're going to spend our sunset years, living with people like us. And in many ways, people who moved to, say, an Athashri in Pune or a retirement home, at least were not lonely. They had people like them around and they could do things as a community. But the horror stories that we hear about how these are mismanaged, there are no rules, there are people, mom and pop shops who are setting them up. So we got the government a couple of years ago, we did a research report, we examined it, we got the government to frame guidelines. Now, because realty is not a national issue, so there are national guidelines, I now have to take it from state to state to get every state to adopt these guidelines, for which, hopefully we will have organizations like this come together. And I hope, post the pandemic, when life gets back to a little normal, we are going to be able to understand the need. Because if you look at so many senior citizens who are living alone today, as Dr. Tristan Fram described very accurately, the panic, the anxiety levels, having to cope on their own. Imagine how many of these would be much better off if there was a mental acceptance that living in a retirement community, and I think Dr. Joki also referred to it in a way, because it has to be a retirement community with assisted living facilities, which I think there are only 3 or 4 of these kind in the country. We need much more of these, but you have to be able to make that smooth transition from a retirement home to assisted living. All of this needs legislation. All of this needs grievance redress. And we have reached a stage, unfortunately, where our politicians just don't care. All of us are working online with Zoom meetings, but Parliament didn't function. I mean, I don't see why Parliament couldn't function. Look, hear the issues that people had, represent them, and talk to each other on a Zoom meeting. It could have easily been done. We've not had a session of Parliament. Not a single MP or MLA has said, let's have it. We have issues, of our people, our constituents that we need to represent. We need a whole set of things. We need a lot more aggressive demands from the elected representatives, because ultimately they are the ones who are going to push change. It's not going to be civil society, which is demonized all the time. It has to be the regulators who are not accountable today. It has to be our elected representatives who don't even want to meet when we have the biggest crisis that has happened, not just in our lifetimes, but lifetimes of people who have lived to the age of 100. The last time you had a pandemic was the Spanish flu, right? But nobody is even discussing it. And I want to stop over here. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Dalal. I mean, obviously, you're not just passionate about this, but this is what you've done for many years, and you know in depth some of the terrible challenges that we need to look at in terms of financial literacy. And I know in your early introduction, you talked about we need to think about introducing financial literacy concepts and those ideas much younger age, so that we can be preventative in sort of how we approach some of these issues. I'm conscious of time because we had committed to wrapping things up at 5:30 Indian Standard Time, and I see there's some really good discussion happening in our chat box here. So what I'm going to do is to try and approach some of these ideas and questions we have in the chat, and have our esteemed panelists share their thoughts and answer some of these questions. So one of the questions that we or ideas that we have floating here is that there has to be an expectation on families and on children that even if they decide to go into nuclear family setups, or there is a change in the family setup, there should be some sort of an expectation that their parents in their senior years must be looked after. Because it's tied to values, it's tied to cultural expectations. And I'm just curious, Dr. Chatterjee, you talked a little bit about intergenerational, mingling and expectations. What are your thoughts on it? As a society, can we not necessarily mandate it, but how do we create an expectation that the younger generation is there to look after the older generation?
I think Dr. Joki wants to say something. Let us hear from him first. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Joki.
Basically, expectation comes from a setting of an example. I think a generation who looked after their own parents have to set an example to the next generation that this has to be done. And it's not something which is an obligation. It's something. It's not something like a duty. It's not. I mean, I would put it the other way around. It's something which you should do from the heart. And if the example is set, that will happen. But on the other hand, there is another side to the persons who are taking care of the older generation also. The older generation on its part needs to understand that as their capacity to do things and their ability to cope up with life goes down, they should be ready for some kind of a change in terms of making things safe for themselves. I'm not saying that they should change their way of thinking or the decision making or whatever they need to do, but in the interest of safety, they will have to step back a bit and say that, well, this is what I can't do now, accept the reality, and therefore, but remain safe so that you don't land up in a problem uh, which will strain your health badly. So this is what I feel is the most important thing I would say on this particular aspect of getting the generations to take care of each other. And I feel that if our children, especially on a personal level, I have a differently able child, and I can see that the bonding of a differently able child with the elderly is fantastic. So a model of that kind of, here is someone that these children who, as they go into adulthood, still require a kind of a support system from the elderly. But at the same time, they are giving a lot of value to the elderly because the elderly feel that they are looking after someone and they are actually providing value to the differently able. So that's all I wanted to say on this aspect.
It's fantastic. I love how you approach the intergenerational role modeling. I live with my 81-year-old mother. I have two sons who are 21 and 24, and together we look after each other. And there's a reciprocity within the household, and so you see that example setting is really having a positive impact on the next generation, and everyone feels valued. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Joki. I'm curious, Dr. Chatterjee, do you have something to add to that? Because you've written a lot and talked about, sort of humanity, is heroism. So could you add to this conversation?
Definitely. There is a living example, this Mr. Sonu Sood, who used to get a role of villain in most of the movie. Nowadays, he's getting some role of as a hero. So again, repeating the same thing, the crisis has forced us to be more empathetic towards each other, which is across the generation, and again, I will add to Dr. Joki, even if he or she is not your own children, what I'm saying is, which was missing before this pandemic also, even in the park, youngster doesn't interact with the elderly people. They just isolate. This is typical example of ageism. When someone, even if I have seen someone who is so active, someone who is super, can you say Mr. Modi that you are aged? Can you say Mr. Amitabh Bachchan that you are aged? You are so eager to talk to him, but when it comes to us, somebody who is a no man, you just don't talk to them. You think that he's useless, he has no wisdom. So again, these things, when I promote this in school children, among the school, I think the high time is in the formative years, between 8 to 14 years, we called as formative. There in the school curriculum itself, even I proposed this to my son's school, that is Sardar Patel in Delhi, and they incorporated that. A few class has been taken by the grandparents for the children, and they are so wise. So in a nutshell, if I say what Google cannot answer, the complex problem, I have this problem, that problem, if you mix it, Google will not answer. Google will answer some ones which straightforward question, right? So even if a lay illiterate grandparents has the answer for this, and they have still value, what we have to imbibe in our children, our adolescents, because both of them are in similar crisis. Adolescent child nowadays are also, they are clueless, they don't have job, they don't know what is their future, they're just roaming here and there, they are going for addiction. Same thing, you come to senior citizen, their future is so uncertain, they don't know what is going to happen financially, physically, mentally, as already we are discussing. But yes, one point I want to add, that whatever may be your physical, whatever may be your financial status, you may stay alone, but remember one thing, you have to stand in your leg. Until unless you are not frail, you are taking care of your activity of daily living, you can cook your food, you can just switch on the TV, remote TV, you are fine. But COVID has increased that vulnerability also. And vulnerability, one point we are missing, vulnerability is the highest risk for elder abuse in any form. So which is again a major topic which will take whole day to discuss. So vulnerability you can only prevent by proper diet, proper exercise. I have a 91-year-old grand friend. when I asked Chacha ji, what are you doing? He told, beta nothing. Roof में तो छोटा सा जगह है, उसमें मैं 10,000 step ले लेता हूँ. So 10,000 step he is taking. He is 91, and that is the actually way of. And I will slightly differ. Expectation create lot of problem. You couldn't came up to my expectation. This happens every day in my family. My father say, I didn't expect this from you. So it should be mutually reciprocating instead of thinking that I expect this, I expect that. But definitely it will start from me. So be the change. That's for true.
Very, very important points for sure. There is a theme in the chat that I'm seeing emerge, and that is about the perception that the elderly are often seen as a burden in our society, which then adds to how they get treated or how they're looked after. Professor Rustam From, I'm wondering if you can comment on this. How do we collectively, different multi-stakeholders, that are important to this conversation and collective action, how do we change a society's perception about the elderly?
It's mute.
Thank you. I would say that the response to this situation is complex. There is one level of acceptance in society where people regard the earning power of a family member as one who is to be respected. And how did this come about? Because one thinks, or one hears, or one knows that in earlier Indian family setup, the patriarch was the patriarch, and his spouse would be referred to as the matriarch, and that went by age and seniority, and it did not go only by the earning. And that is because the economic basis of the family was, joint, in the sense that their living was joint and together, and their economic basis and earning was also joint. But today, when you have nuclear families and each member, male and female, have their own earning capacities, then they are seen in a different light. So when we talk about how do we ensure respect for the older person despite their earning capacity, then it is linked to how society today sees one's quality of life and the way in which one wants to live. And that is not a simple question which could be just answered with any platitude or just any moral lesson. Culture, society, the values that we hold for ourselves, for our families, tend to be quite different from the values of the market and of what is considered, as productive in the marketplace. The clash of these two values is something that we will have to actually come to terms with. And there are some changes which have happened which seem to be inevitable. And never mind any number of homilies or moral stories or moral lessons, these are not going to be easily resolved at a societal level. This is what I would say, actually.
Such an important thing to understand what the marketplace demands, and the power they have over societal perceptions and responses to societal needs, and how do we then at an individual level try to approach this so that we can shape how the perceptions are positive, so that human beings are treated not only as equals but treated with care as they age and move into their sunset years. We are going to be wrapping up in about 8 minutes time. So before I hand it off to Tanmay ji here, I just wanted to say, as Dr. Chatterjee rightfully said, there are some topics here that we could be debating all day long or discussing all day long. Each of these topics and subtopics, is something that we could go so deeply into. But today's discussion was really to not necessarily scratch the surface of a very serious issue in Indian society and in many other parts of the world, including Canada. But it was really to try and socialize the idea that the complex issues that our seniors face in Indian society cannot be addressed by one person, one organization, or one sector alone. A collective, collaborative, cooperative, and creative problem solving approach is needed in order to deal with the many aspects that we have talked about here: the medical, the psychosocial, and the financial aspects of this particular heterogeneous population. From the time our esteemed panelist and Dr. Bharat spoke, a number of important points were touched on, and I quickly want to just highlight a few. Resources are definitely scarce, and there is gaps in policy, legislation, and other areas. But because we as a country now know that we are going to have an aging population, and the numbers are going to be very high in the years to come, we need to really be proactive in how we go about laying a firm foundation to not just solve today's problems, but also proactively prevent problems of the future. We need to make sure that as we transition into a society with disruptions, families going from traditional family units to more nuclear units, that there is actually conversations that happen in our society to ask ourselves who is going to care for our elderly and make sure they're treated with utmost respect and their needs are met. We also had very important discussion touching on intergenerational responsibilities, role modeling, and caregiving, and benefiting through a model of reciprocity, something for all of us to think about. This has been a very, very rich discussion, and I think Tata Institute, and I'm very biased here, Tata Institute is so well positioned not only to have these important discussions, but to bring forward the expertise we have at the institution, the platforms we have to bring people together, right from policymakers, decision makers, non-profits, private sector, the media, the entertainment industry, youth of today, to bring everybody together into this conversation so we can look at the elderly in a positive way, appreciate the wisdom, and figure out a way where we can collectively and creatively make sure that our senior citizens, have a respectful and a meaningful set of years, their sunset years. But also the younger generation of today are in a couple of decades going to become senior citizens themselves. So there's valuable lessons for us to learn as we age. This has been a rich, insightful, and inspiring discussion, and it has been an immense honor to be your moderator today, and always a pleasure to collaborate with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, my alma mater. So I want to give a warm thank you to Dr. Bharat, to all our panelists, and welcome Mr. Nayak to give us some closing remarks and a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sobhana ji. May I request, I'm very grateful that Professor Bharat stayed along during this entire discussion. Although I requested him to make some initial remarks. Professor Bharat, Madam, would you like to say a few words before I thank everybody for this wonderful discussion?
Thank you. I think the panel discussion was so rich and brought out so many dimensions of the problem. Of course, I'm not going to say anything about that. Sobhana has really very beautifully summarized. I just want to say that the problem is quite big, and not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of dimensions. And as I'm looking at and I'm hearing everything, I think we need another round of discussions. For example, we haven't really even touched upon what it takes in the health infrastructure, what it takes in the health sector to provide for this kind of population, not just in terms of human resource, but also in terms of the kind of issues we'll be facing and the kind of training that is required now for the medical graduates and so on. The second issue that is very important is about looking at, as somebody said, that the elderly abuse, etc. which is a growing problem. And a third very important thing, I look at it from a very architectural kind of view. Not everybody would be fortunate enough to have these modeled, housing, living, residential housing societies, etc., for the elderly. I think community living will also be needed for people in slums, people in rural areas, and even in urban areas, how to design for the increasingly elderly population, where social isolation, as I also said in the beginning, and depression, etc., will not just remain with them, but I think it will be a shared kind of a issue. So many things we have to work upon. But this is a very great beginning, and I really thank all the panelists. We will continue to work from the TISS point of view. And Ms. Suchita Dalal, I think, also talked about a whole lot of financial issues, which are very, very important to take note of. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Professor Bharat. It was a wonderful discussion and a lot to take home this evening. Again, it has been summarized so well. It is just my pleasure to offer a very, very formal vote of thanks. I thank the Vice Chancellor of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Professor Bharat, for taking out time from her schedule to be with us during the entire period of discussion. Thank you, Madam. I also thank all the panelists, Ms. Sucheta Dalal, Dr. Prasad Chatterjee, Dr. Bispi Joshi, Professor Nasrin Rustamparam, for a wonderful discussion and the insights they shared with all of us this evening. And if you see the number of participants watching it, it stayed very, very constant throughout the discussion, actually. And to my surprise, actually, nobody dropped. Not many people actually dropped during this discussion. I think that was very, very wonderful to note. And last, not the least, certainly, Sobnaji, a lot of thanks for agreeing to moderate this discussion. It was very early in the morning, as you said. It was 3 o'clock, 3 a.m. at Vancouver when you joined us. But you have been very, very graceful. Thank you. And thank you so much for a wonderful, for moderating it so wonderfully. Thank you so much. And wish everybody a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.